Welcome everyone to our first book release party, Your Next Adventure with the Colony Group. We'll get started in just 1 minute. Thank you for joining us. Okay, a very warm welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining our very first book club release as part of Worth's Lives with our partners from the Colony Group, where we're celebrating the publication of their advisor's new book, Your Next Adventure, Planning for Life After the Sale of Your Business. Firstly, I hope you and your loved ones are keeping well during these unusual times. I'm Juliet Scott-Croxford, CEO at Worth Media and your moderator for the next hour, and I'm delighted to be joined by the authors of Your Next Adventure, Marshall Rowe, Jim Fitz and John Weeks. Hi everyone.
Oh, hi.
So many of us have been impacted by this global health pandemic, and many are still responding and recovering from the crisis as well as pivoting their businesses. Our focus at Worth is to engage and connect our community and partners with inspiring and informative content and conversations that are relevant to your lives and the world that we're now living in, so that we can offer advice and support and insights and resources. And the Worth Live Book Club is a way to connect our community through new publications and topics with authors and with many of you who are also authors and writers yourselves. Our first book launch, which is incredibly exciting, is Your Next Adventure, a book focused on the process of transitioning the ownership and management of a family or closely held business. And we're delighted to have the authors from the Colony Group, Marshall, Jim and Join, with us to share their perspectives on transitioning ownership of your business and also the process that they went through in authoring this book. So a few housekeeping rules before we get started. This is a conversation. We really do welcome questions from you. Attendees are muted on entry into the session. But if you use your chat function at the bottom of your screen, you can type your question in there directly to me, Juliet Scott-Croxford, and I can either unmute you so that you can ask your question directly, or if you'd prefer to stay anonymous, that's totally fine, and we'll weave it into the conversation as we go. So let's get started. This is our first book launch, Your Next Adventure. Firstly, just a personal check-in with everyone. How are you all doing personally, and how are you managing your well-being during these unusual times? Jim, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Thank you, Juliet. Thank you for having us. Well, I think it's important to maintain some level of routine, and whether or not we're working remotely as we are, or whether you're working in the office, we're doing pretty much the same kind of things, interacting with clients. So I think that's important. But by the same token, you know, these are unusual times. And so I'm fortunate enough to live in rural New Hampshire, and I get outside a lot and enjoy the outdoors. I take time to exercise regularly and just be mindful of how lucky I am to, you know, be healthy, and my family is healthy, and we're still able to serve our clients. So I think just a culture of appreciation and you know, getting outside and not getting, you know, too worked up about the things you can't do. Think about all the things that you can do.
And Marshall, how have you been spending this time?
Well, thank you, Juliet. And I'm trying hard to stay connected with my kids. One is in Chicago and the other is in Boston. And although we have always been able to FaceTime or Zoom, it's never been more important since we don't get to spend physical time together. So it's really been a time of thinking about connections with family and with friends, and working thoughtfully about how to do that. That's to me been a big part of this experience.
And John, hi, welcome to you as well. How are you doing? And also, if you wouldn't mind just starting with also how have your professional and personal experiences led you to authoring this book? Because you ran a family business, right?
Sure, yes. So thanks, Juliet. Great to be here with everybody. Thanks for joining us. So I'm on week 10 of work from home. So been settled in here in my my office, my home office. But like many of you out there, I've probably had an over-reliance on too much food and certain beverages to sort of get me through every day. We created a workout area in our basement, and I pulled out my 10-year-old P90X workout DVDs and trying to get at those, and also confirmed that once again that I don't look good with a beard, a mustache, or long hair. So those are the things that have sort of worked their way through as I've worked from home, and there are signs of life, signs that things are starting to come back. So that's encouraging. So with that, just connection to the book and experience. Yes, as you mentioned, I grew up in a family business. It's a business my grandfather started. My dad and his brothers took it over, ultimately sold it, but that was my early experience, just seeing what they went through and the commitment that took. Early in my career, I was a commercial banker, helping business owners grow the value of their businesses. Transitioned over to wealth management, where saw what came out of the sale of a business and helping the business owner in those areas that we'll talk about more today. And then after getting out of banking, I joined a business owner, Marshall Rowe, who started his own business and has had tremendous success. And so it's been good to be by his side for the last 10 years almost.
And I just wanted to say welcome to anyone that's joined a few minutes late. We're here with the authors of the book, Your Next Adventure. We're joined by Marshall, Jim, and John. So welcome everyone, and please do share questions using the chat function to me, Juliet Scott-Croxford. So Jim, so this is the book, Your Next Adventure. What was the goal in writing this book, and was there any particular mission you were hoping to accomplish by writing it?
I think we had, a couple missions in writing it. My background was similar to John's in that I've been on both the business side of supporting businesses and also the personal side. And we've seen a lot of successful transitions and not so successful transitions. Colony's mission is to give our clients peace of mind so they can find joy and meaning in their lives. And when you have something as important as a family-owned business that you transition out of, if it doesn't go well, it's the opposite of peace of mind. When you don't plan properly, you don't anticipate what kind of things can happen to you and your family, then I won't say your world can fall apart, but you've got some real rocky roads ahead of you. So while our experience is certainly available to our clients, our mission in writing this book was to share it more broadly with business owners across the country, so they would have a greater odds of success when they transition their business. The other mission that we had was we have very close professional relationships with a lot of partners, professional partners, CPAs and attorneys, and other professionals that serve the business community. And we also find that they sometimes struggle with their clients in helping them succeed in a transition. So we wrote this book also for our professional partners, so they in turn could help their clients with the experience that we've had be more successful in their transitions.
And Marshall, what are some of the key points that you make in the book? Just give us a sort of a brief synopsis.
Well, I think it begins with the idea of a timeline, and we encourage business owners to start years before they anticipate the transaction or the transition. We talk about T-5, transaction -5 years, as a good place to start. And so starting early is certainly important, but then there are really 5 personal elements which are impacted by the sale of a business, which a business owner has spent his life focused on. And those 5 personal elements include the social structure of their life, their family relationships, their intellectual framework, their health and fitness, and of course their financial life. And so we try and address each of those elements in the book and provide really some useful ideas and an approach that business owners can utilize to think about their own circumstances and what will be success for them.
And at the start of the book, it's full of so many incredible insights, this book. And at the start, you talk about transitioning your business. And John, you talk about business owners transitioning from managing and operating a company to managing a financial company after the sale of the business. What do you mean by that?
So when you think about a business owner and what they're involved with on a day-to-day basis in running their business, I mean, there's finance, there's human resources, sales, marketing, all these different aspects. It all goes into creating this successful business that is creating value for themselves, the asset itself, but also that's their paycheck. I mean, they're getting, every week or whenever they get paid. That's how they live. That supports their lifestyle. And when they go through the transition, the ownership of their business, when they turn that closely held illiquid asset usually into a very liquid asset, cash, you've got to manage that cash think about managing that cash much like you thought about managing the business. It will be the engine that supports your lifestyle, your family's lifestyle, legacy, other things that we're going to talk about today. So just as it's important to have the right advisors, to be looking at the right aspects that are driving your business, you got to look at that engine that will be supporting you in a similar way. While it's similar in some ways, it's different in many other ways. And, we spend a lot of time sort of looking at that overlap of the personal and the business. And as it starts to come apart, you need to look at the components that are going to stay with the business and then the others that are going to be outside of the business that are coming with the owner, with the family. And how are you going to control those? How are you going to manage those? And one example of that is just, health insurance. It's health insurance provided by the company. And if you sell that company, usually there's that separation. What are you going to do? Where are you going to get it from? You used to be able to go in and, you had an HR person and they took care of that. Well, they're not there anymore. And so who is it that's going to provide it? How's it going to be provided? And the real eye opener for many is, the cost of things like that, again, they were just part of the business. And now guess what? It's part of your personal business that you've got to run yourself. So that's what we talk about there.
Thank you. And I just wanted to say welcome to everyone. A few additional people have joined. Thank you. This is our very first book club release as part of Worth Live with our partners from the Colony Group. And we're celebrating the publication of their advisor's new book, Your Next Adventure and Planning for Life After the Sale of Your Business. So delighted to have Marshall Rowe, Jim Fitz and John Weeks with us. Just moving on, there's a concept in the book around the 3 clocks. Marshall, what's that all about? Because I found that very intriguing, and it really speaks to the sort of personal and professional aspects of thinking about the sale of your business.
Yeah, the concept of 3 clocks really tries to look at the broad picture that a business owner is facing. And the premise is that for an ideal transition, you want all 3 clocks to be aligned. And the first clock is the industry clock, meaning that an ideal time to transition or sell a business is when your industry's economics are strong, there's good growth in the industry. In particular, there are high multiples being paid for business in the industry. That's an ideal time to think about selling or transitioning your business. So that's the first clock. The second clock is the business itself, meaning that is the business ready to be sold? Do you have a good management team in place? Or do you have good margins? Has your growth rate been persistently good? Do you have a diverse customer mix or client mix? Or do you have an over-concentration risk? Thinking about getting your business ready to be sold and making sure that your financials are in good shape and that you have audited financials. Just the preparation of the business and making sure that it's running well and your management team is in place so that you have a good asset that you're essentially putting up for sale. The third clock is the one that we primarily focus on in the book, and that's you, the business owner, and your family. And what we've seen many times, and many of the advisors that we work with, whether they're corporate attorneys or M&A bankers or the other CPAs, accountants associated with the business, is that often the industry is obviously leading its own life. The business owner has run a good business. That's what he's focused his life and passion on. But the family may not be ready for, as John was just saying, this operation which produces a lot of cash, may employ members of the family, plays a big role in the life of the family. And if they, as well as the owner, are not ready for this transition, it's probably the single most prevalent reason why transactions don't take place or why they fail at the 11th hour, is that the family is not ready for the transaction. And that comes back to why we wrote the book. We're trying to make sure that the family is ready and prepared for the transaction so that the family clock can align with the business clock and the industry clock. And that really leads to a successful transaction.
And it surprised me that the family clock, that the readiness, the family readiness, the sort of preparation for this is kind of actually start to think about this 5 years ahead of when that transition might take place, right?
That's correct, because you're talking about family expectations, the reality of family members working in a business. Those dynamics may change. If you're developing leadership in your company, if you are thinking about your next adventure, which is the business owner's life after the transaction, it all takes time. And part of the motivation to write the book was our experience with business owners who did not take the time to plan well in advance. And we've seen the outcome of that. And often it's not a pleasant experience for the business owner or their family. And it can lead to very unfortunate circumstances for the family as well as the business owner if they don't plan and really take the time to plan in advance.
And we'll come into some of those sort of examples that have been positive and not so positive later on in the talk. Two areas that interested me, sort of one was very relationship driven and the other one was around the role of giving back. Jim, how can philanthropy play a role in a successful transition?
I think, in a couple ways. First of all, the philanthropic intent has to be, has to exist within the family and the business owner themselves. It's not very often that a business owner who has no philanthropic intent and no experience with philanthropy will all of a sudden become a philanthropist, upon the sale of the business. But most of the clients that we work with, most of the people that we know in this field that are business owners, have already started to give back while they've been business owners. The difference is that upon a liquidity event, upon the transition of a business, there's a substantial additional capacity for significant philanthropy than there was before. That's not to say that some business owners aren't very philanthropic and very generous in their charitable giving while they are business owners, but the majority of the value that the family has is generally tied up in the equity in the business. And so when a transition occurs and that equity is monetized, there's a substantial amount of liquidity that all of a sudden becomes available. That changes the capacity for the business owner to further and realize the family's philanthropic intent. That creates obviously resources and opportunity, but also creates challenges. Most people that go through or are charitably inclined during their work lives aren't necessarily that strategic, unless there's a great deal of wealth in the family. They don't tend to be very strategic in their giving. And all of a sudden, when there's a tremendous amount of capacity, the opportunity for being strategic comes into play. When a business is transitioned you know, there'll be a lot of people lined up helping you, wanting to help you figure out what you can do with all that liquidity. All good intention, but it's valuable for the family to really think strategically about what they want to accomplish with their philanthropy, so they can be very targeted with it, and they don't go off in a bunch of different directions that may not have the impact they're looking for or the staying power that they do. So I would say the first one is just a question of capacity and enabling the philanthropic intent that the business owner already has. Of course, the second opportunity for philanthropy comes in tax mitigation. You know, a transition does create generally a large tax liability. And if there are thoughtful charitable structures that can be put in place during the transition, prior to the transition, if you plan enough ahead, that can make a significant difference in the tax liability that's directly associated with the sale of the business. If a family is charitably inclined and they intend to continue to be charitably inclined for the balance of their lives, they've got a long future in front of them of philanthropy. And with that liquidity that is created at the time of a transition, there's the opportunity to fund into the future a lot of that future philanthropy.
I also thought it was nice where it can also be used as a vehicle to sort of bind the family and different generations of the family together.
That's something that's very common, and it touches on another theme that we have in the book, and that's how the relationships change once a business has been sold, and Marshall touched on this. The role of the business owner and the family changes, the relationships between the family members change, the identity of the business owner and even the identity of some of the extended family may change when the business is no longer associated with the family. That can create some upheaval. And we have found that philanthropy is a common way that we can continue to help the family come together around a common goal. The business created that common goal in the past, but with the business gone, philanthropy can often fill that void.
And John, how important is the business owner's spouse or partner, and how is that why is that so critical in a successful transition?
Well, I think family communication, family relationships are a big part of what we talk about in the book, and you know, it starts really with the spouse and how that relationship during the business owning years is a distinct relationship. It may and likely involves a lot of discussion between the two about what's going on in the business, the future of the business. As they start to think about what the next adventure might look like, the communication becomes even more important, more critical to the success of it, because you sell your business and you now come home, you have free time. How are you going to fill that time? You're seeing somebody maybe a lot more than you've ever seen them before. So to not have worked on those things and talked about those things as a build-up, as a preparation for the ownership transition, really creates a lot of risk and a lot of risk in an area that you absolutely don't want to fail at, because you know, that's part of this fulfilling next adventure is that you have that time to spend time with family, to do some things philanthropically, perhaps to reconnect with your community, but your spouse, again, has likely played a significant role for you during the business ownership time, and so needs to prepare for and go through a transition right side by side with a lot of communication going on, and you both come out the other side ready to take it on, ready to thrive in that next adventure.
Thank you. I just want to welcome everyone, and a reminder that if you have any questions for Marshall, John or Jim, please do use the chat function, and you can send them directly to Worth Media or to me, Juliet Scott-Croxford, and we'll build them into the conversation. Moving beyond the sort of spouse and partner, you talk about how important it is to have a transition team in place. John, can you just elaborate a bit on that, and why is the transition team different, or why possibly should it be different from the advisors that you've previously worked with on a day-to-day basis in the business?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, most successful business owners have a really solid team of advisors that they've worked with for many years, and really help them with the day-to-day matters that might come up, whether it's their attorney on legal matters, their accountant, insurance advisor, all of them contributing to the ongoing management and running of the business. When you start talking about transitioning the ownership of the business, there's still those needs in place. You still need legal, account, tax, and insurance, but there are additional needs and additional expertise that you want to make sure are represented on this, many call it the deal team. And so the deal team can certainly include your existing team, but as you enter into the exit planning process, you got to think about whether they truly have that expertise that's going to be needed. And there's true expertise that for many, it's not likely that they have. Things like business valuation. There's in some cases there are, but not often, somebody who's looking at the value of the business, what's driving the value of the business, how does the business sit within an industry. So business valuation is really critical, especially as they think about, what's my number? And many deals don't get done because the owner has this idea of how much it's worth, and the market's not ready for that. And so it's important to sort of set that through a business valuation thing. Another part of that is a quality of earnings, another important component where you, the business owner, through this expert can really shake down the historic earnings, and show a potential buyer that these are good earnings. If there's any wiggle room in there, you've addressed it, you've looked at it, you understand it. So quality of earnings is another thing that may need to, likely needs to be introduced. Who's going to help you with the marketing and sale of the business? It's a closely held business. It's within an industry, but what is the market for that business? And you need some expertise, whether it's investment banker or business broker, who can basically create a market for your business. They're going to go out there, do the research, make the connections, priority have the connections where they're going to bring your business to market, and you want them to help you not only find the most value, but also the right, partner to go forward. For many of our business owners, it's not just about the money. It is about culture. It is about what the terms of the deal. It's about what happens to the community and my employees afterwards. So an investment banker, business broker, they're going to help you in finding that correct partner. Even within the legal team and the legal representation that you have, merger and acquisition legal work is distinct, and you really want somebody who's got a lot of experience with that, because things are going to come up different than the day-to-day legal matters. Certainly wealth management, we talked about managing that financial company that comes out of the sale of the operating company. And for many, and this is one of the things we address in the book, for many business owners, they wait until the deal is done, and then they're like, okay, now I'm going to go find somebody to help me with this. And they start working with a wealth advisor who starts asking questions about, well, did you think about doing this leading up to the transaction? Did you, have you looked at whether this financial company that came out of the sale of your operating company, can that support all the things that you want to do? Not only, me and my lifestyle, but also philanthropy, the community, all the other things that you're thinking about doing. And so, and getting a wealth manager on board early in the process to help you with that personal clock that Marshall talked about is so important. And there are exit planning advisors out there, experts in really managing that entire team. And it's not sort of day-to-day, do what I say to do, but it's really, there's so much expertise there, but who's going to bring it all together and understand the overlaps and make sure that they are complementary in the work that they're doing, and there's not sort of going off in different directions. So another person who can really add a lot of value in a successful business transition.
And from transition, we have a question around post-transition. Marshall, what are some of the examples of post-transition activities that have helped to ensure a successful next adventure?
That's probably the biggest challenge for business owners, and it takes time to identify that. But a foundation of our approach is that business owners have a lot of passion, and that's why they are entrepreneurial. They have great energy and belief and passion, and that needs to find a new destination. Those destinations vary, and they're not always obvious. Some business owners think that they're finally going to have the chance to play golf or to sail or do whatever they might want to do that they've always wished they had a little more time to do. But in truth, what business owners really need to look for and hopefully find is something substantive that will capture not only their time and their energy, but their heart. And it means perhaps becoming a mentor or a coach for other entrepreneurs, or pursuing a life goal like becoming a life master in bridge, or joining the board of a nonprofit or of another corporation so that you stay engaged in the same kinds of activities. Another is developing your own talent in terms of maybe you're a musician and you've always wanted to become part of a musical group or a musical enterprise, or you have some latent artistic talent and want to become a painter or a potter. The other, and I think a really important opportunity, is to actively volunteer. There are lots of organizations, whether you're talking about the Red Cross or the Boys and Girls Club, it crosses a broad spectrum within your community or within the larger community of our country, who are really dying for ambitious, thoughtful, experienced volunteers to make their organizations go and to make them better. And that type of hands-on engagement really leads to one of the core pieces of what will feel like success following the sale of the business, which is social engagement, social connection. When you sell the business, you lose a lot of your social connections. And rebuilding that social structure is, whether it's with your family or with your partner or spouse, but importantly in your community, rebuilding a new social structure is going to be extremely valuable and helpful to making you feel like you have a fulfilled life after the sale of the business.
And can you share some stories or examples of business ownership transitions that perhaps didn't go so well? Who wants to take that one?
Jim, you want to go with that one?
Well, sure. I mean, we can't share specific client stories, but let me address it a couple ways. Marshall has touched on the planning for and thinking about your new identity when you come out on the other side of the transition. And where we have found in our experience where that hasn't worked well, a typical result is what we refer to as hibernation. A business owner will come out the other side and not really have any clue as to what their purpose in life is. Their whole identity has been wrapped up in running a business, solving problems, interacting with vendors and employees in the community, and being a member of the community in not only good standing, but a respected member of the community, sitting on boards, whatever. And all of a sudden, on the other side, the phone stops ringing, the emails stop coming, and the identity has just been gutted by no longer being a business owner. You're now a former business owner, and that doesn't sound very exciting. So without proper planning as to what that's going to look like and what your opportunities for engagement and purposeful living are, you wind up just hunkered down and not wanting to engage socially. So that's not healthy. It's not healthy for relationships and the family. It's certainly not healthy for you individually. And to the extent that, as John pointed out, you have responsibility to run a financial company, but you're ill-equipped to do that. And if you don't have a purposeful life around you, then what's the purpose of running that financial company? And you can end up making poor financial decisions, which have an impact not only perhaps on you and your immediate family, but depending on the amount of wealth involved, could have an impact on generations to come. I'd like to take the other side of that question, and instead of talking about failures, talk about successes. And I think to encapsulate the steps that are necessary so you can ensure a successful transition, we break them down basically into 5 steps. And I think John and Marshall and myself have touched on each of these, but sequentially, first of all, you've got to know where you're going. So if you're going to have a successful transition, you have to have a goal-setting process where you really understand what the purpose of the transition is going to be. What is the family's vision? What's the family's mission going to be? What kind of future is going to be on the other side of this? What do you want to accomplish with the liquidity that's been generated? You've devoted 30, 40 years of your life and your family's life into creating this company. So what's the purpose of this? What are your goals for the next adventure? So that goal setting process is very important. It's where you re-engage with the family, and you make sure, and we certainly recommend that every member of the family that's going to be impacted by the sale has a seat at the table. This is where the business owner can understand perhaps better than they have in the past as to what the objectives of the family are, what their expectations they are around the sale. So that's the goal setting process, which is both a personal process and a family process. The next step, the second step of a successful transition is the pre-transition planning. And this is, Marshall talked about the 3 clocks. And this is basically where you do all the work to bring the 3 clocks together. And again, the personal and family clock being the one this book deals mostly with, but making all of the decisions you have to do from a business standpoint to make sure the business is ready to go as well. So knowing where you're going, i.e. setting the goals, doing the proper work to prepare the business and your family. You can't do a lot with the industry, but aligning those 3 clocks, that's prior to the transition itself. And then, as John pointed out, the deal team is really important, because once you get to the transition, you want to make sure you've got as qualified or more qualified experts on your team as the buyer is going to have on their team. So that does involve the M&A attorneys and the tax accountants and the business valuation experts and things like that, that are going to be very important to make sure the structure of the deal is consistent with the goals that you have set for the future. And again, John said that it's frequently not, or maybe it's Marshall, frequently said it's not the amount of money or the maximum amount of money that gets the deal, it's the structure that gets the deal. So that is the third step of a successful transition, is making sure this deal structure is right and that the acquirer is the right acquirer that's going to meet the long-term goals of the family. The fourth step is that immediate post-transition piece that Marshall touched upon. This is where you've got to get the financial company up and running properly. You have to have your cash flow forecasts, understand what they are. You have to have your asset allocation correct, your investment plan in place. You have to update your estate plan. All of the insurance coverages, health insurance, all of these things that are necessary to get that company, that financial company, up and running well. And then the last step really is this life balance. And we talk a lot about the life balance, and Marshall touched on that as well, finding a purpose in life, an outlet for your entrepreneurial energy, and the reason for the remainder of your life. And we can touch about that. We talk a lot about legacy and legacy building in that framework. So that's a successful transition. When you go through those steps, you're going to have a successful transition.
And we'll come on to legacy shortly. I've had two questions from the audience. John, one is specifically about how someone should approach dealing with family members who are against the idea of selling the family business, and any advice there on how you navigate that.
So family can be the most challenging aspect, especially a family business that's run through multiple generations, and that's usually you get that dispersed ownership. Maybe some members of the family who have remained involved, and then other members of the family who aren't involved but have some ownership. And so so you run into some situations where everybody's on board, and you know, and you get through it through some great communication and work together. And then there's others where it just breaks down. And what you want to do is, much like we're advocating the T-5 that Marshall's talking about with family, you know, it goes back generations that you got to start working on this, but you can, you know, start working on it as early as you can. You got to keep the family involved, engaged, and share communication so that you can uncover the sticking points that you might run into, and there's going to be some, and you can address them as best you possibly can through the process. I talked about the deal team and the advisor team. There is a cottage industry out there, and an effective and impactful cottage industry out there that deals with families and family businesses. And they are the psychologists, psychiatrists. I mean, they deal with sort of this really soft stuff, this relational stuff. And we've found, and we've helped to introduce some of them to the family businesses that we've come across, so that you've got that third voice, that independent voice who is playing referee, who is you know, leading the conversation, getting you over hurdles and things like that. So again, it can be really, really tough, but proactively dealing with it is much like all of this. It's really communication and proactively going after it as early as you possibly can.
And how much did your own experience being in a family business inform the writing of this book, John?
So who's on here who knows my history? So yeah, so you know, again, I lived through it with, you know, this business that my grandfather started, then passed it down. You know, 3 boys. One of them couldn't work for Dad, so he left and started his own business. One, and the 2 remaining, my dad being one of them, ran the business. But they reached a point where, you know, the decision was made that that things needed to change, and they needed a partner, and there was disagreement there. And so it was a long, tough process that they went through. And it took a lot out of the family, took a lot out of my dad, took a lot out of everybody involved. And they likely could have benefited from reaching out to more advisors who could have helped them. But they got through it. And you know, and we can all talk to each other today. But yeah, it can be the most challenging aspect of all of this.
And Marshall, I have a question which is sort of contextually about the time that we're currently in during COVID and the pandemic. I think you were quoted recently regarding it now is still a good time for sellers to move forward with a transaction. Why do you think that is? And any advice for sellers thinking about selling their business during this time?
Well, certainly the pandemic is changing the world. There's no question about that. It's changing family life, is changing the business life. And from my perspective, the pandemic is, at a minimum, should be a catalyst to encourage business owners to think about their plan, and to think about their business, and to think about their family, and to begin that process, because the business world is changing. As we are experiencing today, technology is going to be a more significant component of virtually every business on the planet. And it's going to change workflows, and it may change geographies. This is really going to be the beginning of a more significant period of change in our business environment. And for some businesses, it will be a distinct advantage. There is a very bright silver lining to this. For other businesses, it may create change which is more problematic. And so every business owner should think about the post-pandemic world. Will scale be an even greater advantage? And how can their business and their enterprise be engaged going forward, either within the family, with the next generation who has the energy to face these new challenges, or is it more realistic to look for a business partner, a merger partner, or a sale where it's more clear that the opportunity to realize the value of the business and perhaps the energy of the family that's been put into the business, perhaps for generations, that the opportunity to recognize that value may in fact be enhanced coming out of this pandemic. But now is the time to start thinking and planning and being proactive and being bold, not retreating and not putting off the hard work that we've been talking about, but really moving forward with that. And clearly some businesses are going to be advantaged coming out of this in the world as it changes. And you want to be proactive and ready to take advantage of that.
And just moving on to sort of finding purpose post-transition and this sort of notion of legacy. And there's a lovely quote in the book that it says, we learned early on that there's a difference between the resume you build for your work and the resume you build for your life. Can you just talk a little bit about sort of purpose and legacy, Jim, and what factors play into thinking about that?
Yes. You know, we all have a legacy, and we're all going to leave a legacy, whether we want to or not. We were going to be remembered for something, or we're going to be remembered for many things. You know, by the time a business owner reaches the point in their life where they're going to transition their business, they've probably already built a portion of their legacy. We encourage our business owner clients to think honestly and objectively about what they've built and how they are perceived, what they're proud of, where they may still have some work to do, or perhaps even a legacy to repair, you know, depending on what their relationships are with their family. You know, these thoughts will come naturally to people later in life, but when you've got 10, 20, 30 years still ahead of you, there's a tremendous opportunity to, you know, burnish the legacy that you've already built, perhaps without thinking too much about it, or maybe even to reinvent the narrative entirely. So again, we're all going to have a legacy. It's a question of whether we want to take control of that legacy and how we want to be remembered, not only by our family, but by the community in large. You know, a great example, I think, of this that we don't often think about is Dickens' Ebenezer Scrooge. You know, when we think about Scrooge, we think of, you know, a hard-nosed businessman who is argumentative and isolated and, you know, not really a very nice person. But the arc of the story ends with his redemption. And in fact, that's a great example, not that business clients are all Scrooges, but that's a great example of how someone can take active control of their legacy and reinvent themselves, which comes back to purposeful living, comes back to taking control of what that next adventure is all about. You know, and I'm not speaking, when I talk about legacy, I've never mentioned money. And some people think that, you know, the legacy you leave behind is how much money you leave behind, and, you know, what kind of good works you do with your money. Well, the good works are part of it, but this really isn't about inheritance. When we think about legacy, we think about the values and accomplishments that you have been able to accumulate and what you have done to serve others, something other than yourself. And this comes back to the quote about a life resume, versus a professional resume. And it's how you're going to be remembered at your service and years afterwards. It's really important, and the most important part of building a legacy.
And Marshall, can you get, for those that are on that perhaps have recently gone through a business transaction like this and a transition like this, can you give some pointers on how someone can get started in thinking about legacy if it hasn't really been part of their thought process so far, and like what should be an entrepreneur's main goal post transition? How should they think about that?
Well, as Jim was saying, legacy really is not about finances usually. It's about your relationship and what you leave of value for others, whether it's within your family or your community or with your employees and your other business and industry colleagues. And success in that regard really is a function of the relationships and listening to others who know you. I think one of the most important elements to understand about this is this transaction's bigger than the business owner, and it's going to impact the family, his or her spouse or partner, the employees. There's a larger impact. And I know as a business owner, and I can speak in the first person, that you tend to focus on your own challenges, but you need to step outside of yourself as a business owner if you want to think about your legacy and understand better the role that the business has played in the lives of many other people. And it may be your grandchildren, or it may be your extended family, or it may be the community. And a successful transition is when you've been able to move through that transition, move past the hibernation period that Jim was talking about, which there's almost an inevitable period of letdown after you close the transaction, because it's been building to a crescendo in terms of the intensity of your focus and the work, and getting that transaction closed or the transition within the family closed. But coming out the other side, it's often usually about the success of your ability to have strong relationships, whether they're within your family, within your community, within your business colleagues following the sale. Those relationships, the strength of those and your engagement will be both important to you and also be a very substantive part of that legacy that you leave behind. And so while finances are important, and certainly, as Jim suggested, many will come to you hoping that your philanthropic ambitions will fall in their direction. In truth, for you and your family, it's about relationships. It's not really about the finances.
Thank you. And John, there's another question here as we bring this conversation to a close. Around what was your favorite thing about writing this book?
Favorite thing about writing the book was really the outreach that we did to interview advisors and business owners about this, this idea that we had. The idea being, there's many advisors out there dealing with the transition of the business ownership, the business itself. But there's this gap and this need for help with the business owner and their family to get them ready and to move them through the transition process. So we had this idea, it was informed because we've had many conversations ourselves, but we went out and did these interviews, and we were really explicit about wanting, when we're talking to a business owner, we want the spouse there, we want both the feedback. And so a much more informed interview, talking to both of them together and seeing their reactions and how they each felt about the process that they'd gone through, what worked, what didn't work. So so it's that face-to-face sort of seeing the reactions, and really, you know, confirming this hunch that we had that that this was really an unmet need that would be beneficial to focus on in a book and in the work that we do.
And Jim, did you learn anything new or unexpected in doing this book and having these conversations with different business owners?
I'm not sure there are any aha moments, but what it did do was force us to think, you know, honestly about what we were doing and how the pieces fit together. So I think in doing this, we ended up becoming better advisors. You know, we worked closely together, and you know, John brings a set of experience, you know, to the table, and Marshall does, and I do, and by collaborating on this book, I think we all learned from each other. And when we would bring an idea to the table to talk about it, we sometimes started in a certain position, we wound up in a different position. And we wound up just through the process of thinking through the experiences that we've all had and how these pieces fit together. So I can't identify a specific instance, but I know that we our thinking evolved in the writing of this book. So that was important. The aha moment that I had, or what I really got out of writing this book, not so much writing it, was what happened when it was done. And I gave a copy of this book to not a client of ours, but it's somebody who sits on the board who has been a very successful businessman and has since sold his business and has a private foundation and a very successful individual. And he read the book, and he called me up afterwards. He said, "Jim, I wish I had this book before I sold my business, because I would have done it differently." So then I knew that we'd done a good job.
Yeah, that's very good affirmation. And Marshall, bring us to a close. What's the one thing that you hope readers will take away from the book once they've read it?
I hope they understand that they need to start planning early, and that the benefits of planning early and thoughtfully will accrue not only to themselves, but very importantly to their family and to their spouse or partner. Understanding that communication along the way, and I think John alluded to that in his family's circumstances, communicate along the way, help people understand how you're thinking, listen to how they are thinking, and that communication over a period of time is what really builds the foundation for a successful transition of the business.
Marshall, Jim, and John, thank you so much for such an insightful and engaging conversation. I really did enjoy the book, and I'm glad I've read it prior to hopefully selling a business one day. Thanks again to our sponsoring partner, the Colony Group, and most importantly, thanks to all of you that have tuned in today and for the great questions. We hope you found it useful and insightful. Please do share any feedback with us. We'd love to hear your comments. You can email us at community@worth.com. And particularly if you're thinking of releasing a book anytime soon that you'd like us to consider for a future book event, please also email us. Again, it's community@worth.com. For those that's registered and provided your mailing address, you will be receiving a copy of the book complimentary from the Colony Group over the coming weeks. So look out for that. And if you're a sports fan and you're interested in joining us tomorrow at 3 p.m. for our next normal series, we're joined by Commissioner Don Garber from Major League Soccer to discuss what the future of sports will look like for fans, teams and owners. So you can register for that online at Worth/events. Thank you again. Thank you, speakers, Marshall, John, Jim, you were really great. And it's been a fascinating topic of conversation. And in the meantime, stay healthy and well and enjoy the rest of your day.